We have our first witness this morning is going to be John Sopko, who has been our staff lead on this investigation, and we will hear from him before we hear from Director Webster this morning. I understand Director Webster will be here in a few minutes, and we'll hear him as our second witness. Mr. Sopko, we swear all witnesses for our subcommittee. You swear the testimony you give for this subcommittee will be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
We have your whole statement, and I know it's a very long and detailed statement, and I know it's difficult to summarize, but in the interest of time, we will ask you to summarize, and if you could start by giving us your background, length of time with the subcommittee, what you've done before that. We think that's part of the record here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Sopko. I'm the Deputy Chief Counsel of the subcommittee. Since 1982, I've been employed as counsel for the subcommittee. Prior to 1982, I was a special attorney with the Department of Justice Organized Crime and Racketeering Section. I've been assigned to conduct this subcommittee investigation since its inception. As previously alluded to by Senator Cohen, on the evening of Saturday, November 2nd, 1985, KGB agent Vitaly Yurchenko walked out of a Georgetown restaurant, Au Pied de Cochon, and into the annals of defector history. The publicity surrounding Mr. Yurchenko's Last Supper in Georgetown continues to this day, both in the controlled Soviet press as well as in the Western media. Particularly in the Soviet Union and behind the Iron Curtain, the events surrounding his alleged escape and handling have been expounded to illustrate the treatment that can be expected of any fugitive to the West. However, not far from Yurchenko's memorable repast, just 6 months before, another event occurred which is just as relevant to the scope of this inquiry today. It was the defection of a senior diplomat from an Eastern Bloc country. Although the diplomat neither knew Yurchenko nor anything about him, his treatment as a non-intelligence agent defector is just as important as Yurchenko's to our understanding of the importance of defection and the problems inherent to the resettlement of fugitives from totalitarianism. Little publicity surrounded that diplomat's leap to freedom because of security reasons as well as the desires of the diplomat in question. Although in possession of highly useful information, he did not defect to give us state secrets. This Soviet bloc defector left solely for the chance to live and work in a state of freedom that we in the West too easily take for granted. As the Yurchenko case caused the American people to reassess the CIA's handling of intelligence officers who defect and brought about needed improvements, the handling, or more accurately, the lack thereof, of the diplomat defector who is still here appears to call for needed reforms. The staff found that defectors are not squeezed like a lemon and thrown away, as commonly alleged in the Soviet press. Instead, most defectors seem to wish they had been squeezed a little more. Not constrained by the stringent physical security requirements, the non-intelligence service defector could more easily enhance our nation's understanding of the closed Soviet and Communist bloc society, which for the foreseeable future will be our country's primary protagonist in foreign and military affairs. Yet our record so far with the handling of these defectors indicate the opposite. For example, Dr. Peter Nicolai, a high-ranking economist for the Romanian government attached to Comecon, spent over 5 years in New York running a laundromat and selling ice cream before he came to the attention of the Jamestown Foundation and others who are now attempting to find a way to put his storehouse of information on the East European economy to better use through writing, lecturing, and research. Alexandra Kosta, who will testify tomorrow, who was the wife of a senior Soviet diplomat, was initially urged by a government representative to become a clerical employee. Fortunately, due to her perseverance and the personal interest of a number of government officials, she was able to graduate from the Wharton School and start a successful life as a businesswoman here in the United States. 8 years after her defection, her insights into the Soviet society is now a bestseller here in the United States. As Chairman Nunn has previously alluded to, Alexander Ushakov, a professor of Marxism, will testify tomorrow. He hiked for 19 days over the Caucasus Mountains to reach the West. He had been arrested for writing articles allegedly slandering the Soviet state. Fortunately, he was released by the KGB in hopes that he would lead them to other co-conspirators. Additionally, due to a quirk in Soviet law, the Soviets would not charge him until he had been stripped of his Communist Party membership. This peculiarity allowed Ushakov to escape. Ironically, once here in the United States, the fact that Dr. Ushakov had been a member of the Communist Party now bars him for an additional 5 years from becoming eligible for American citizenship. Another example is that of Andrei Sorokin, who has submitted a statement for the record. He was a Japanese area studies student from Moscow State University when he defected in 1983 in Japan. Although proficient in 3 languages, Russian, English, and Japanese, he wound up washing dishes in a New York restaurant for 3 years until discovered by the Jamestown Foundation and assisted in employment. Tadeusz Kucharski, who defected in 1983 after serving 5 years as the Polish commercial attaché in Angola, was never even debriefed by the United States government concerning Soviet and Polish military and commercial affairs in that troubled part of Africa. Since his defection, he and his wife have found successful employment and are assisting other Polish émigrés to adjust to their new life here in America. Others have not been as persistent as these individuals or as lucky. Within the last few months, 2 promising defectors returned home. Vladimir Kovnat, a prominent Soviet TV correspondent, photojournalist, and filmmaker who had worked extensively in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, returned with his wife on July 31st to the Soviet Union. In addition, Bronius Venklova, a former Soviet interpreter who defected in 1985, could not withstand the pressure of the propaganda campaign engineered by the Soviets to secure his return. This August, he returned after complaining that he could no longer take the constant telephone calls and harassment engineered by the Soviet government. As stated before, at the direction of Chairman Nunn, the subcommittee staff has conducted an extensive investigation into the handling of defectors by the government. The inquiry included interviews of a large number of defectors, government officials, former intelligence officers, non-governmental agencies, and volunteer organizations. Based upon these interviews and the significant body of work performed by both intelligence committees of Congress, it became apparent early in the investigation that a vacuum exists in current government programs for the systematic identification and productive integration of a significant group of defectors into U.S. public life. The staff found that while a government system is in place for dealing with a very discrete type of defector who falls within the purview of the U.S. intelligence community, which has been very successful over the past, there is no comparable system in existence for the bulk of defectors who do not meet these stringent and specific requirements. The vast majority of defectors to the United States from totalitarian regimes, the subcommittee staff found to be covered by the programs supplied by the various voluntary agencies that handled the over 60,000 refugees that annually enter our country. These programs are generally geared to the resettlement of vast numbers of people of various ethnic and social backgrounds, most of whom arrive here as legal emigres. The staff found those programs generally inadequate to handle the special, higher-level defector from the Soviet bloc whose past close association with the totalitarian government he fled from often impedes his acceptance in the U.S. emigre community and the community at large. And let me just pause at this point, Senators. It should be clearly noted that nothing in this statement or nothing that the staff or the subcommittee is stating should imply any criticism whatsoever toward these or the other voluntary refugee agencies. With very little government assistance, They have tirelessly performed excellent work, successfully resettling thousands of refugees. But even these voluntary agencies acknowledged the need for greater assistance for those refugees from totalitarian regimes due to the additional problems they face here in the West. In focusing on this latter group, which is the focus of this committee hearing, and based upon our investigation, the staff made the following conclusions. First of all, these individuals can make a useful contribution to our society and our national security by helping to fill important gaps in our knowledge of the Soviet bloc, as well as in projecting future actions of the Soviet bloc leadership in the political, economic, and military arenas. Number two, the subcommittee staff found that this unique resource remains for the most part untapped by both government and society in any long-term and systematic way. Thirdly, government assistance to defectors is limited to a very small group. Fourthly, that these defectors face unique problems in resettlement and integration into our society that are not currently being adequately addressed by the government and voluntary private organizations, sometimes leading to their return to the Soviet bloc. Due to the defectors' prior experience and position within the Soviet bloc, the staff found that these individuals tend to find acceptance within those emigre groups that have already settled in the United States to be difficult. Thus, the normal support mechanism for emigres, and for these individuals in particular, among previously established ethnic communities, does not exist. Sixth point that the staff found was that a concerted, sophisticated, and intense program of harassment and intimidation meant to force the defector to return to the Soviet bloc exists and appears to be expanding in the United States. Although it does not approach the violence, intensity, or overtness of the efforts in the 1950s and 60s, its novel psychological methods for playing upon the defector's initial adjustment period is a continuing problem. All of the above directly and adversely affects our national security, given the underutilization of the defector's unique talents, the negative impact upon future defection, and the propaganda use that the Soviet bloc makes of these failings. These problems affect not only the number of future non-intelligence defectors, but also the critically important defection of the intelligence officer, or other essential alien, since the treatment of all is inexorably intertwined to the would-be defector behind the Iron Curtain. Turning to the close of my statement, Senator, the net result of all of these issues, practical as well as emotional, has been mixed. Some defectors have overcome these hurdles and successfully integrated themselves into the professional world, even when, as in most cases, this was done without the assistance of the U.S. government or other voluntary agencies, but was due to perseverance and luck. But many others have had inordinate trouble finding jobs, homes, and careers, in some cases leading to their return. It is the staff's conclusion that many of the most successful cases of resettlement have been due to the efforts of individual Americans who have taken it upon themselves to assist the defector. Mark Wyatt, a former intelligence officer, has done probably as much as any other individual private citizen in the United States to help defectors. On his own time and with his own funds, he has arranged job interviews, found housing, made introductions, and paid for their travel and lodging. Yet even Mr. Wyatt acknowledged to the staff that this important responsibility should not rely for its success upon the, quote, action of a few highly motivated individuals, unquote. He, as well as others who have acted above and beyond the call of duty for a private citizen, feel that a government system should be set up in order to take the luck out of successful defection and resettlement. Just as with the question of the utility of an individual defector, it is difficult to judge the specific consequences of a defector who does not teach, or an emigre scientist who drives a cab instead of working in his true profession. Moreover, it is even harder to determine the cost to our society of unnecessarily delaying or even preventing the use of a defector's unique insight into the public domain. As stated before, the more apparent result of such action seems to be the adverse impact upon future potential defectors from the Soviet Union. As University of Kansas Vice Chancellor Dr. Jerry Hutchinson commented in his statement that's submitted for the record today, if those who come to the United States find the assimilation process to be a salutary one, then others will be encouraged to follow. If the experience is a negative one, highly educated Soviet citizens may reconsider defection or choose to immigrate to other countries. Thus, from a political viewpoint, it is in the best interest of the United States to make the transition to the American culture an expeditious and positive experience. In sum, the cost to our society can best be described as Chairman Nunn has done in his opening statement, that of lost opportunities. Although totally unquantifiable, since we will never know who would have defected but for the news of Yurchenko, etc., it seems obvious that a system that ignores the unique talents as well as his or her unique problems bears a serious cost in terms of our national self-interest. Senator, in closing, I would just like to indicate that the staff has prepared and would like to offer at this time 27 exhibits for insertion into the record, including probably the single largest compilation of statements by defectors, over 11 statements plus the statements of the witnesses who will be testifying, as well as basically the only public research that's been done on defectors by Etienne Huygens, who was a former research director for the Jamestown Foundation, and the work of Vladislav Krasnov. So I would ask at this time that we offer into the record these 27 exhibits.
Without objection, they'll be entered into the record and numbered appropriately. I just have a couple of questions. You talk about the problems, you talk about the lost opportunities. And you mentioned that the government itself should get more involved, but you also mentioned that the intelligence, the narrow slot of intelligence defectors are generally given more attention and care than the broader group of defectors who don't fit that slot, but who may very well also be important officials, former officials in totalitarian regimes. Now, have you got any recommendation for our consideration as to how we go about, as a government, dealing with those individuals that fall into that slot? In other words, what agency of government, if any particular agency, or who should assume the responsibility?
Senator, a number of recommendations will be made throughout the hearing. You will hear some today from a number of individuals. Some of the recommendations, and I can't say that the staff accepts every one of them, but some that we have heard is to utilize current funding mechanism through Title VIII of the State Department, which gives funding for research in the Soviet area, just to set up a separate category for funding to those non-intelligence defectors to get their input, to either fund them as itinerant scholars for maybe 1 to 3 years at various institutions where they get an opportunity. First of all, they're being paid to do the research that they were doing before, but they get an opportunity also to meet American scholars, to learn more about the American system. They can maybe develop better academic credentials, because many of them come here, although they may have degrees, PhD degrees behind the Soviet Union. It's against the law to bring out your diploma with you. So they can't prove that they have a degree. So many of them have to go back to school here and get American credentials in order to compete. That is one recommendation being made, to use just the current funding mechanism through the State Department, which then gives money out through, I believe it's called the National Council for Soviet and Eastern European Research. We will have a member from that organization testifying on the third day. That is one recommendation. Another recommendation is merely to increase the funding, because currently the voluntary agencies only get $650 per refugee resettled. Just to increase the funding to the voluntary agencies, which have been in existence, and you will hear from Mr. Leo Chern tomorrow. These agencies have been in existence since the 30s in helping refugees. Utilize them as a potential area for assisting the defector. There's numerous recommendations, but those are two of the most prominent ones that we have heard in our staff investigation.